Hi, it's time for another math easy solution. To discuss a pretty interesting video that's going to be on climate change and look at that famous 97% consensus figure. And I'll go over part one of this consensus series, which will look at reviewing Cook et al.'s 2013 paper, which is the most popular one on the consensus figure there for climate change. And part two, I'll analyze the data that Cook et al. Uses in great detail, so stay tuned for that. And before I get to this video, I just want to point out, like always, if you don't have time to watch this whole video because it's going to be pretty long, you can skip to the end for summary, conclusions, and other parts of the end, which is a bit different than other videos I've done. Or you could also play this video at a faster speed. And top secret life hack: your brain gets used to faster speed. Try 2 times speed on YouTube on the desktop mode. It's absolutely amazing, and I use that all the time. And also you can download and read the notes. Link will be in the description below, as well as you can view these notes on Steemit. I'll upload that in. It's going to be in article format shortly after I upload this video. And also you could watch this video in parts. Doesn't need to be all at once. And now, before I get to the topic, note this is a revised version of my earlier climate change video, which I made. I was actually, let's see, when was that? That was November 28th, 2016. But now I've made it unlisted. Yeah, so it won't be there when you just look it up on the search, because I felt it could be improved, and I wanted to, just update that. But you can still see it. There's the link there, and you can go and view that climate change consensus of scientists Cook et al. Review part 1. But in that part, I actually go over the analysis of the data in a bit, so you can check that out if you want to. And also, note number 2, in this video I review Cook et al. May 2013 paper, but in a later video I'll analyze the data that was used in their paper, so stay tuned for that, which is going to be in part 2. So let's look at this climate change consensus. Topics to cover: Barack Obama's tweets while President of the United States, Cook et al. May 2013 consensus paper, and then summary of that Cook et al. Paper. Al again just means and others, and it's used when referencing sources. Just shorten it down, so Cook and others, or Cook et al. Parallels to my master's thesis. So yeah, I did a master's in mining engineering, and I'll go over a bit of that and how it relates to this whole consensus topic, and also go over mainstream media coverage. And then finally, set of summary conclusions, I have the big picture, hidden tech, false flags, and wars, plus dangers of consensus. And again, all this is tied together, so buckle up. It's gonna be a wild ride. So let's go over the presidential endorsement of climate change consensus. So let's first take a look at what the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, had to say about climate change. So here's a tweet from 2016. Last year, 97% of climate scientists agree climate change is real and man-made. Hashtag act on climate. And now there's a picture of just some lonely guy. If anybody still wants to dispute the science around climate change, have at it. You'll be pretty lonely. Again, this is just trying to discourage people from questioning climate change, and that is what, in my opinion, is. And this person replied, "I very much doubt 97% is the truth." And I like that. So, and then another tweet by Obama. This was 2015. When 97% of climate scientists agree, it's time for the deniers to put politics aside and hashtag act on climate. And then simply refusing to say the words climate change doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening. And President Obama, again, this is trying to push a mentality of agreement to whatever climate policy, etc. So the 97%, this person replies, the 97% agreement is a myth that has been debunked 1,000 times. Please stop lying if you can. And I liked and retweeted, just, why not? So another tweet, 2014, fact: 97% of scientists and NASA accept the science of climate change. I'm with the scientists. It's time to act on climate change, and act as in increase taxes. And this person's tweets, but if it isn't, which is a very good question. So keep in mind that Barack Obama has now over 90 million Twitter followers. Thus, many people across the world are seeing this 97% consensus figure, so it's blasted pretty much worldwide. Side note: how many of his Twitter followers are real? I just wanted to check. And if you go to twitteraudit.com, and their score is 65%, so about 30 million fake, 58% real. So it isn't 90-ish. It's more like 58 there. And that site checks how often the users log in, etc., and how active they are, how many followers they have, if they're likely bots following it, and whatnot. Now, just for comparison, Donald Trump has 62%. So again, similar to there, it's an okay score. According to the Twitter audit, it has about 12 million fake, 20 million real. Total's about 32-ish, like that. Now, if you check mine, I'm 98% because this was actually older. I think I have a bit more. I'll have to check now. But yeah, I'm basically as real as it gets. And also wanted to check another big time celebrity that has a really high score is Kanye West. Had 16 million real, so 92%. That's very good. While Kanye is a pretty real following for a big time celebrity. But now if you go to his account to see what's up, it actually doesn't exist anymore. What the F? What happened to Kanye? To find out what likely happened to Kanye, make sure to watch my hashtag Pizzagate Part 27 video. Actually, don't watch it. I'll put the link in the description below. But actually, don't watch it if you want to maintain a sane view of the world. Hashtag Spirit Cooking. So yeah, it gets pretty wild as to what likely happened to him. And also, if you go to Katy Perry, another, this is the highest Twitter followers. This is a combined 100 million. But if you put in the Twitter audit, has 62 million fake, 37%. This is 37% audit score of fake. 30% are real. So then 63 are fake. So that's 37 million real. That's less than Obama's 58 million there. So he has more real ones. But again, Katy Perry. And if you look at time, they say Katy Perry just became the first person to reach 100 million Twitter followers and became the most followed person on the platform. So yeah, nothing like a fake reward for fake accomplishments. Also, make sure to watch hashtag Pizzagate Part 27 to see why Katy Perry is being pushed so heavily. Again, just don't watch that video for your own sake. I'm just warning you because it's quite wild. But okay, anyways, now let's get back to climate change. So Twitter audit suggests that about 65% of Obama's Twitter followers are real, which still translates to tweets reaching a lot of people, about 58 million real followers. Let's take a look at a tweet which he provides a reference for his 97% consensus figure, and that's here. This is from 2013. 97% of scientists agree climate change is real, man-made, and dangerous. Read more, and there's a link to a Reuters article. Scientists say united on global warming at odds with public view. So yeah, the idea is change public perception. So 97% of scientists say global warming is mainly man-made, but a wide public belief that experts are divided is making it harder to gain support for policies. And is there any doubt what the agenda is? So now if you go to that article, that's here from May 2013. So scientists say united on global warming at odds with public view. And there's a photo of a dead tree stands in front of a shallow water. Yeah, I'm not going to that. So environment correspondent Alistair Doyle. So if you go through the article, it says 97% of scientists say global warming is mainly man-made, but a wide public belief that experts are divided is making it harder to gain support for policies to curb climate change. An international study showed on Thursday. The report found an overwhelming view among scientists that human activity led by the use of fossil fuels was the main cause of rising temperatures in recent decades. I'll go over that paper. This is the one they're mentioning, is the Cook AL. There is a strong scientific agreement about the cause of climate change, despite public perceptions to the contrary, said John Cook of the University of Queensland in Australia, who led the study in the journal Environmental Research Letters. There is a gaping chasm between the actual consensus and the public perception, he said in a statement. When people understand that scientists agree on on global warming, they're more likely to support policies that take action on it. Global average surface temperatures have risen 0.8 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. Experts in Australia, the United States, Britain, and Canada studied 4,000 summaries, or just the abstract, not actually the papers, of peer-reviewed papers in journals giving a view about climate change since the early 1990s, and found that 97% said it was mainly caused by humans. Yeah, again, this statement is actually quite misleading. I'll get to it. They also asked authors for their views and found a 97% conviction from replies covering 2,000 papers. The data will be released at skepticalscience.com. The report said it was the biggest review so far of scientific opinion on climate change. If people disagreed with what we found, we want to know. Yeah, said Mark Richardson of the University of Reading in England, one of the authors of the study that looked at English language studies by authors in more than 90 nations. Another co-author, Dana Nustotelli of Skeptical Science, said she was encouraging scientists to stress the consensus at every opportunity, particularly in media interviews. So again, it's trying to push this consensus as opposed to actual facts. So opinion polls in some countries show widespread belief that scientists disagreed whether climate change is caused by human activities or is part of natural swings such as the sun's output. And then a survey of the U.S. Pew Research Center published in October last year found 45% of Americans said yes when asked, do scientists agree Earth is getting warmer because of the human activity? 43% said no. Yeah, so rising concentration of carbon dioxide. The main greenhouse gas hit 400 parts per million in the atmosphere last year, the highest in perhaps 3 million years. Governments have agreed to work out by the end of 2015 a deal to slow climate change that a UN panel of experts, I absolutely hate that term, says will cause more floods, droughts, and rising sea levels. What about hidden climate control tech? Anyways, that discussion for another day. So it is clear scientists are urged to push this consensus because the general public don't believe it. Yeah, my view is the general population, a lot of them don't believe in climate change, and then this, I believe this is a phony bone of contention, which is scientists are in disagreement. Whether they are or not, I believe the public don't worry too much about climate change, or at least a large percentage of that, in my opinion. So also note the fear-mongering about natural disasters due to climate change over there. So basically, agree with the consensus because, you know, floods, droughts, sea levels, yeah, rise. So anyways, let's take a look at this paper by John Cook and others, or al. If you go to climate.nasa.gov, this is NASA climate page. And this is on their scientific consensus. Earth's climate is warming, and there is a graph is a tiny scale and negative 0.6, 0.8 difference in temperature, and they have it in 1880 to 2020 it's rising. I guess a lot if you consider the scale's pretty small, but I'll have to look at that further. I'm just arguing the I'm just going to go review the consensus figures. It's temperature data from 4 international science institutions. Yeah, and going on. So multiple studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals show that 97% or more of actively publishing climate scientists agree climate warming trends over the past century are extremely likely due to human activities. In addition, most of the leading scientific organizations worldwide have issued public statements endorsing this position. The following is a partial list of these organizations, along with links to their published statements and a selection of related sources. Just skip through that. This is the reference here, number 1. It goes to here. And this is a 2016 paper right here, Cook et al. Consensus on Consensus, a synthesis of consensus estimates on human-caused global warming. Yeah, this is just consensus on consensus of different papers on consensus. Quotation, the number of papers rejecting AGW, anthropogenic, or human-caused global warming is a minuscule proportion of the public's research, with the percentage slightly decreasing over time. Among papers expressing a position on AGW, an overwhelming percentage, 97.2%, based on self-ratings and 97.1% based on abstract. Look at these decimal places, holy cow. It endorses the scientific consensus on AGW, and then the second reference is the one I'm going to cover. This was that Reuters called most comprehensive review as of yet. So John Cook et al. Quantifying the consensus on anthropogenic global warming in the scientific literature. Quotation from 3. Among abstracts that expressed a position on AGW, 97.1% endorsed the scientific consensus. Among scientists who expressed a position on AGW in their abstract, 98.4% endorsed the consensus. So anyways, let's just jump right in. So note, since there are many references cited for one, there's other ones right here, and that the first Cook et al. Involves finding consensus within other consensus. That's the one I was talking about. Hashtag consensusception. Inception. In this video, I will only review only Cook et al.'s May 2013 paper. That's this one right here, instead of these other ones. This is just non-stop consensus. So let's look at this one. Cook et al. Quantifying the consensus on anthropogenic global warming in the scientific literature. And again, there's that quotation 3 I just read. So quantifying the consensus on anthropogenic global warming in the scientific literature, that's a link. And then the URL goes to here, over there, that's iopscience.iop.org. And that's this one that NASA references. So yeah, quantifying the consensus on anthropogenic global warming in the scientific literature. Here are all of the authors that contributed to this. And also in there, it shows how many downloads. Look at this one, 600,000 downloads. This is an absolute ridiculous amount. Video abstract, views 28,000. Yeah, I didn't see the video one, I guess. It's pretty cool. So now you can see 3,000. This is, I guess, posted on articles, news outlets, blogs, Facebook pages, tweeted by this much. So this is very, very viral. This is supplementary data. I'll go over this in part 2, or mainly this one. Maybe that's just talking about the reviews by the people, unless on the papers. So we'll get to that later. And also they have some corrections here. So going on. So yeah, wow, this paper has gone super viral, although I'm very certain it's not wholly organic. Well, you got the president, former President Obama tweeting that, so obviously you're going to get a lot of views. Yeah, so now here's the PDF link of it, and you can download it there. Archive's not available, but my own local archive, if this ever gets removed, you can go and download it here locally from my computer or OneDrive. That's a link there. So let's dive right into this paper abstract, and here's the abstract. We analyze the evolution of the scientific consensus on anthropogenic global warming, AGW, in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, examining 11,944 climate abstracts from 1991 to 2001, matching the topics global climate change or global warming. We find that 66.4% of the abstracts expressed no position. So you have this much. And then these ones have no position. So 32% endorsed, 0.7 rejected AGW, and 0.3 were uncertain about the cause of global warming. Among abstracts expressing a position on AGW, 97.1% endorsed the consensus position that humans are causing global warming. In a second phase of the study, we invited authors to rate their own papers. Compared to abstract ratings, a smaller percentage of self-rated papers expressed no position on AGW. Yeah, 35.5%. And then among self-rated papers expressing a position on AGW, 97.2% endorse the consensus. Yeah, all these figures are just so, in my opinion, convoluted. They're just trying to get the highest figure number, in my opinion. So for both abstract ratings and authors' self-ratings, the percentage of endorsements among papers expressing a position on AGW marginally increased over time. Our analysis indicates that the number of papers rejecting the consensus on AGW is a vanishingly small proportion of the published research. So keywords: scientific consensus, anthropogenic global warming, peer review, global climate change, intergovernmental panel on climate change. So I go through a summary on this later in the video. You could skip to that if you want to, but I'm going to go over some of these parts in detail right now. So introduction. An accurate perception of the degree of scientific consensus is an essential element to public support for climate policy. Communicating that scientific consensus also increases people's acceptance that climate change is happening. So yes, that's what they want, people's acceptance to it. Despite numerous indicators of a consensus, that word is used unbelievable amount of times in this entire paper. Consensus. There's wide public perception that climate scientists disagree. In my view, people's perception is that they just don't believe in climate change, or it's overly stated for taxes and other stuff like that. So over the fundamental cause of global warming, so they believe scientists disagree over the fundamental cause. The most comprehensive analysis performed to date, we have extended the analysis of peer-reviewed climate papers in Orsukas, another person. We've examined a large sample of scientific literature on global CC, or climate change. That's right there. Published over a 21-year period in order to determine the level of scientific consensus that human activity is very likely causing most of the current GW, anthropogenic global warming, or AGW, like that for human cause. Surveys of climate scientists have found strong agreement, 97 to 98%. Wow. Regarding AGW amongst publishing climate experts. Again, I hate that word. Repeated surveys of scientists found that scientific agreement about AGW steadily increased from 1996 to 2009. This is reflected in the increasingly definitive statements issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the attribution of recent GW. Going on further, despite these independent indicators of a scientific consensus, the perception of the U.S. public is that the scientific community still disagrees over the fundamental cause of GW. From 1997 to 2000, public opinion polls indicated around 60% of the U.S. public believes there is significant disagreement among scientists about whether GW was happening. Similarly, 57% of the U.S. public either disagreed or were unaware that scientists agree that the Earth is very likely warming due to human activity. And my beef with all this is there's very few actual climate experts. A lot of these people in the papers just assume global warming is real for funding and whatnot. I'll get to that all later. So through analysis of climate-related papers published from 1991 to 2011, this study provides the most comprehensive analysis of its kind to date in order to quantify and evaluate the level and evolution of consensus over the last 2 decades. Methodology. This letter was conceived as a citizen science project by volunteers contributing to the Skeptical Science website. In March 2012, we searched the ISI Web of Science for papers published from 1981 using the topic searches for global warming. It's basic keywords looking up. Article type was restricted to article, excluding books, discussions, proceeding papers, and other document types. The search was updated in May 2012 with papers added to the Web of Science up to that date. We classified each abstract according to the type of research, category, and degree of endorsement. Written criteria were provided to raters for category and level of endorsement. Table 2 is Table 1's category, and here's Table 1. So it's interesting. So impacts, effects, and impacts of climate change on the environment. Example, if these are just number statements or partial sentence or full sentence inside the abstract. Global climate change together with increasing direct impacts of human activities such as fisheries are affecting the population dynamics. Methods. This paper focused on automating the task of estimating polar ice thickness. Again, this isn't about climate change, this is assuming it's real, and then you write about stuff like that. So these are the category of the papers, or the abstracts, and then this is Table 2, the definitions of each level of endorsement. So explicit endorsement with quantification. The global warming during 20th century is caused mainly, so this means endorse. Endorse greater than, greater than 50%. If they just say something like mainly, by increasing greenhouse gas concentration, especially since the late 1980s. Again, this statement could just mean they're just assuming. It's not actually about it. This is just it. These might not be experts, they're just assuming. And then without quantification, emissions of a broad range of greenhouse gases of varying lifetimes contribute to global climate change, and going on. No position while the extent of human-induced global warming is inconclusive. Actually, that's uncertain. Then there's a rejection. The human contribution to the CO2 content in the atmosphere and increase in temperature is negligible in comparison with other sources. These are actually, in my opinion, actual experts because they're actually arguing against just an assumption. So that's my view. I'll get to that later on. And here's considered implicit endorsement. Carbon sequestration in soil is important for mitigating global climate change. And sentences like that will be included in there, endorse climate change. So MES note, important to understand that the abstract study simply looked at whether there was a sentence or even partial sentence subjectively indicating agreement or assumption of AGW and agreement or assumption that AGW was likely above or below half due to humans. No indicators as to the expertise or level of expertise of those involved in the papers. Instead, they're just called experts. And then group everyone together. But in my opinion, the ones that reject it are the ones that are actually on a larger percentage of the experts on it versus the thousands that just write these papers with that assumption. Very few percentage-wise. It could be more than the ones rejecting, but regardless, very few percentage-wise actually, in my opinion, are experts. So my view would be instead just look at actual experts instead of just people that write about topics relating to climate change. It doesn't mean you're an expert in climate change if you write with that assumption. So we'll get to that further. So abstracts were randomly distributed via a web-based system to raters with only the title and abstract visible. All other information such as author names and affiliations, journal, and publishing date were hidden. Each abstract was categorized by two independent Anonymized raters, a team of 12 individuals completed 97.4%, 23,000 23,000 of the ratings, and additional 12 contributed the remaining 2.6 or 607 ratings. Initially, 27% of category ratings and 33% of endorsement ratings disagreed. That's interesting. Raters were then allowed to compare and justify or update their ratings through the web system while maintaining anonymity. Following this, 11% of category ratings and 16% of endorsement ratings disagreed. They were resolved by a third party. Yeah, so just those are some details on it. Amos said, "Who are those raters? Random interns, co-op students, or experts?" So yes, these were the. I'm just not sure about this whole study. So to complement the abstract analysis, email addresses for 8,000 authors were collected, typically from the corresponding authors and or first author. For each year, email addresses were obtained for at least 60% of papers. Yes, about that much were collected. Authors were emailed an invitation to participate in a survey in which they rated their own published papers. The entire content of the article, not just the abstract, with the same criteria as used by the independent rating team. Details of the survey text are provided in the supplementary information. That's that supplementary data above. So these were how much were emailed, but I think only about like 1,000 that actually replied. And then they reviewed their entire published paper to see if that paper agreed or not with AGW. So the results, the ISI search generated 12,000 papers, eliminating papers that were not peer-reviewed, not climate-related, or without an abstract. The analysis reduced to 11,944 papers written by 29,000 authors and published in 1,980 journals. To simplify the analysis, ratings were consolidated into three groups: endorsements, including implicit and explicit, and then no position, and then rejections, including implicit and explicit. And then we examined four metrics to quantify level of endorsement: percentage of endorsements, rejections, undecideds among all abstracts, and so all that stuff. And the percentage of endorsements, rejections, undecideds among only abstracts expressing a position on AGW. The percentage of signers authoring endorsement rejection abstracts among all signers. The same percentage among only those signers who express a position on AGW. So yeah, those seem just a bit confusing. Here's a table. Hopefully it makes a bit more sense. So abstract ratings for each level of endorsement is shown as percentage and total number of papers. So endorsing AGW. Yeah, right here of the total papers, 32% endorsed. No position was 66% according to those quote independent raters or interns. And then these are the amount of papers rejecting and then uncertain. Again, my view is these ones are the actual only ones that are experts in some way on climate change. Whereas the vast majority of these are just people writing with that assumption for grant money, funding, and otherwise. And now here's among abstracts with AGW position. That's basically with these positions. These combine these two, and it becomes this, I believe. So actually, that's this one here. All three of these. Combine that 97.1% of these total, would be endorsing. And then if you look at the percent of the author, it broke it down, and that is 98.4. Again, this paper has like 6-7 authors or whatnot. You don't know how many are actually writing it, and other ones will just put their name on. And just tag along, put a sentence or two, or some sort of backing or consulting. So anyways, going further, so endorsement percentages from abstracts. Among abstracts that express a position on AGW, 97.1% endorse the scientific consensus among scientists who express a position on AGW in their abstract. 98.4% endorse the consensus. And there's these, these are just number of abstracts, and no position on it is going up, just because there's more papers. Endorsement AGW, this is going up. Again, that's total one here. These are low. And if you look at the position, this one's going down a bit. If you look at the percentage of abstracts like that, just because there's more papers like that, and obviously you're going to have some people denying it or dissenting. Because again, in my view, they have a larger percentage of those actual climate experts in some way. Whereas the vast majority of those are probably just people assuming it's right. Whereas, again, this paper also agrees that they're assuming, but they're assuming for different reasons. They say that because the science is settled. My view is he won't grant money. So anyways, moving forward, so the average numbers of authors per endorsement were 3.4. And the scientists originated from 91 countries. Going on, this is some extra information there. In fact, here I just removed that, just put a ... so I didn't end up reading it. Yeah, I didn't end up reading this video. Okay, so just remove that to make it easier when if you download the notes, so that it doesn't just cover space there. So endorsement percentages from self-ratings. We emailed 8,000 authors an invitation to rate their own papers and received 1,200 responses. 14% response after excluding papers that were not peer-reviewed, not climate-related, or had no abstract. 2,142 papers received self-ratings from 1,189 authors. The self-ratings rated levels of endorsement are shown in Table 4. Among self-rated papers that stated a position on AGW, 97.2% endorsed the consensus. Yeah, that figure's right here, 97.2, and then it says among self-rated papers not expressing a position on AGW in the abstract, that's actually above right here, so that's in the abstract, no position. This is 66.4%, like that. Yeah, that's actually the total, so this is a bit confusing. I have to go down to this table, actually. This table right here. So of those self-rated papers, when you look at the abstract rating, there's 1,300 like this that had no position, except the self-rated one had only 761. So that means, according to this, that 53.8% were self-rated as endorsing the consensus, even though the total number of that was the abstract were considered no position. So yeah, that figure is hard to get your head around. It basically, of the abstracts, of all the papers that were self-rated, when you look at the abstracts that had no position, of those no position ones, the authors actually self-rated the papers as endorsing the consensus. And again, because it's easier to just agree than trying to go against the fold, especially when your email and your paper and everything is known to these people that are, in my opinion, doing a witch hunt. That's pretty much it. Now we go further. There is this graph, and using that abstracts, these are the self-rated now, number of self-rated ones, again going up and up as expected, just because there's more papers being done here, and this is just level like that. And then the percentage of it, there's nothing too interesting about this. And again, percentage of people actually rejecting it is obviously going to be low, because in my view those are actual climate scientists, actual experts, versus just a vast majority just assuming, as I'll get to later on. So now a direct comparison of abstract rating versus self-rating endorsement levels for the 2,100 papers that received a self-rating is shown in Table 5. More than half of the abstracts that we rated as no position or undecided rated as endorsed AGW by papers authors. So when you take all of those papers that were going to be self-rated by the authors, the abstract rating of those is here, and then you're saying, so obviously they're thinking that when they rate their own paper, they're obviously going to think more on the AGW side, versus the abstract alone, the raters just thought, they're pretty generic, so can't give that a position. So MES note, basically authors felt their papers endorsed AGW at a higher rate than the random raters did based on their abstracts. Instead of even viewing whether abstracts, papers, authors, quote, endorsed AGW, why not just look at papers that argue for or against AGW? This is what I've been stating many times in this video. Whether authors endorse AGW or not is a matter of psychology. This is the important thing I want you to understand about after watching this video. It's all psychological operation, and it's a matter of psychology of groupthink / group dynamics, especially when no indication is shown about the level of climate science expertise among the authors. Instead, they're all labeled with the go-to word of experts. So then when the public sees, oh, experts are saying this, so it must be all correct. Even though many of these, in my opinion, are not experts in the actual climate science, and instead they assume, they accept the assumption of AGW for funding, in my opinion, which I'll get to later. So figure 3 compares the percentage of papers endorsing the scientific consensus among all the papers that express position, endorsing or rejecting the consensus, like here, and they're just comparing the percentage of percentage endorsed based on abstracts and self-rating. And again, these are among all that express the position, and again, obviously it's going to be those super high 97-ish percent. Yeah, so going on, discussion of note is a large proportion of abstracts that state no position on AGW. This result is expected in consensus situations where scientists generally focus their discussions on questions that are still disputed or unanswered rather than on matters about which everyone agrees. So again, my view is that just assume for funding, this paper's view is, oh, because it's settled. That's their view. So this explanation is also consistent with a description of a consensus as a spiral trajectory in which initial intense contestation generates rapid settlement and induces a spiral of new questions. Again, assume it, and then you can do new questions such as how do we limit it? How do we limit CO2? So what device? What electric stuff we could do, energy, and all of that, and that's where the question of funding comes in. So the fundamental science of AGW is no longer controversial among the publishing science community, and the remaining debate in the field has moved to other topics. This is supported by the fact that more than half of the self-rated endorsement papers did not express a position on AGW in their abstracts. And again, I disagree with that. I believe just psychology. You ask a scientist that had a paper that was somewhat neutral or just based on climate change, whether they are or not, and then you ask them, you have their email stuff, likely they'll just go along with the flow. So MES note, while I agree that the settlement of the AGW question yields new questions and avenues for research, I am very suspect with the view that everyone agrees, as well as this entire paper being written in the first place. Because my view is that very few people actually are experts in the fundamental arguments for or against AGW. It is more financially and socially beneficial for scientists to make the assumption of AGW because it is easier to get funding and avoid ridicule for any projects that they want to work on. These authors don't necessarily mean they are, quote, climate experts, and examples would be scientists doing research on a device to entrap CO2 or develop electric cars with better mileage, and thus are able to obtain funding because of the assumption of AGW. So basically there's more money in assuming AGW versus saying it's not man-made, so don't give me money. So yeah, it's hard to get funding for something that fundamentally means don't focus efforts on other renewable stuff or taxes or other funding. So that's my view. So also the abstracts, quote, rejecting AGW are likely by actual climate experts, or at least at a higher percentage than those, quote, endorsing AGW, since one can't simply assume the minority position. They need some sort of actual facts to back that up, versus the majority has, well, the consensus view, which is, again, in social environments, that's a powerful thing. Thus it is my view that a better comparison would be reviewing only scientists that have papers and not just abstracts and that those scientists make definitive arguments and not just statements or half of a statement or half of a sentence for or against AGW. That should be the review. Only the actual arguments. No review of these random endorsed and not endorsed, which in my opinion is very dangerous, as I'll get to later on. I'll go over this in much more detail in part 2, so stay tuned to show just how much are these people endorsing it or these abstracts. Sources of uncertainty. The process of determining the level of consensus in the peer-reviewed literature contains several sources of uncertainty, including the representativeness of the sample, lack of clarity in the abstracts, and subjectivity in rating the abstracts. We address the issue of representativeness by selecting the largest sample to date for this type of literature analysis. Another potential area of uncertainty involved the text of the abstracts themselves. In some cases, language made it difficult to ascertain the intended meaning of the authors. Naturally, a short abstract cannot be expected to communicate all the details of the full paper. The implementation of the author's self-rating process allowed us to look beyond the abstract. A comparison between self-ratings and abstract ratings revealed that categorization based on the abstract alone underestimates the percentage of papers taking a position on AGW. Yeah, their view is it underestimates. My view is, now you have actual psychology in play. But regardless, this overall thing, I think this article shouldn't even be written or this paper. Lastly, some subjectivity is inherent in the abstract rating process. While criteria for determining ratings were defined prior to the rating period, Some clarifications and amendments were required as specific situations presented themselves. So yeah, two sources of rating bias can be cited. First, given that the raters themselves endorse scientific consensus on AGW, so the raters are obviously going to be for AGW, they're involved in the study, they may have been more likely to classify papers as sharing that endorsement. So comparisons with previous studies, our sample encompasses those surveyed by Orskis and Schultz, and we can therefore directly compare the results going on. So Orskis determined that 75% of papers endorse the consensus based on the assumption that mitigation and impact papers implicitly endorse the consensus. Again, mitigation, impact, it doesn't necessarily mean that the climate scientist is an expert in the arguments for or against, because finding funding for mitigation impact is, especially government funding, is much easier assuming the AGW. So conclusion, the public perception of a scientific consensus on AGW is a necessary element in public support for climate policy. Again, why is there no argument about actual climate policy? That should be what's up for debate. Not even if you believe AGW is real or not, climate policy is a whole other thing when you're dealing with taxes, regulations, and otherwise. So, however, there is a significant gap between public perception and reality, with 57% of the U.S. public either disagreeing or unaware that scientists overwhelmingly agree that the Earth is warming due to human activity. Contributing to this, quote, consensus gap are campaigns designed to confuse the public about the level of agreement among climate scientists. So in 1991, Western Fuels Association conducted a $510,000 campaign whose primary goal was to reposition global warming as a theory, not fact. And then whoever's funding this paper, in my view, is also doing a psychological operation to just get people to, accept climate policy change and otherwise. So a key strategy involving constructing the impression of active scientific debate using dissenting scientists as spokesmen. So now again, even further attacks on these people questioning. The situation is exacerbated by media treatment of the climate issue, where normative practice of providing opposing sides with equal attention has allowed a vocal minority to have their views amplified. While there are indications that the situation has improved in UK and US prestige press, the UK tabloid press showed no indication of improvement from 2000 to 2006. Again, now they want media manipulation, and I believe that media as a whole is already on this climate change bandwagon. So I believe their concerns here are actually highly overstated, at least in a majority of major mainstream news outlets. So the narrative presented by some dissenters is that the scientific consensus is on the point of collapse, while the number of scientific heretics is growing with each passing year. A systematic comprehensive review of the literature provides quantitative evidence countering this assertion. The number of papers rejecting AGW is a minuscule proportion of the published research, with the percentage slightly decreasing over time. Among papers expressing the position on AGW, an overwhelming percentage, 97.2% based on self-ratings, 97.1% based on abstract ratings, endorses a scientific consensus on AGW. Again, my view on this whole paper is psychological operation. So let's go look at the summary of this Cook et al. May 2013 paper. So the Cook et al. Paper can be summarized as follows. Phase 1, the abstract review. 11,944 abstracts of papers related to climate change were reviewed. 66% had no position on AGW, 32% endorsed AGW, 0.7 rejected AGW, 0.3 were uncertain about the cause of global warming, assuming the globe is warming. Again, is it not? What's doing it? What kind of hidden tech are doing it? Is it doing it on purpose? As I'll get to later. So among the 32, plus 0.7 and plus 0.3, that's here, these all had positions like here, these are the positions. Among these that had a position, 97% endorsed AGW, even though 66% did not have a position. So the people reviewing the papers were, quote, independent and anonymized, i.e. interns, co-op students, experts, I don't know, let's just put a experts sign, because, everyone's an expert when it fits your agenda. So phase 2, author self-ratings of entire papers. So they do entire papers instead of just abstracts. 2,100 papers were self-rated by 1,100 authors. 62% endorsed AGW. 35.5 had no position, even though they were selected so that the abstracts was this kind of ratio. So yeah, you had it higher here. And then 1.2% rejected, 35.5 had no position. Among these, 62% plus plus right here 1.8, 64.5% papers that endorse AGW, 97.2% endorsed AGW. Yeah, this is actually not endorsed. This is had a position on AGW, 97.2% endorsed AGW. An endorsement includes any of the abstracts in Phase 1 and papers in Phase 2 that have instances of referring to climate change that imply it is human-caused, state it is human-caused without indicating the amount, and state that is mainly human-caused, i.e. more than half. This entire study is not science in my opinion, and appears to be more focused on influencing the consensus of future papers and scientists. Think about how many scientists are going to write a paper on AGW when there's a consensus on consensus papers non-stop saying 97%, and dissenters should be, ashamed of themselves pretty much. I'll be analyzing in detail the supplementary data used by the paper, or the data used by the paper in obtaining these figures. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for part 2. And now let's look at parallels to my master's thesis right here. This is from UBC. So I did a master's thesis in UBC 2014, published. Yeah, this is the University of British Columbia in Canada, Vancouver, Canada. So seepage-induced consolidation test, characterization of mature fine tailings by Matthew Esteva. That's me, BASc, Bachelor of Applied Science. Yeah, the University of British Columbia 2011 is when that's when I got my bachelor's in civil engineering. A thesis submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Applied Science in the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, Mining Engineering, University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Jan 2014. So in my abstract, here's abstract, I just cut it a bit. So abstract, managing oil sand slurry, tailings waste is a waste from oil sands production or extraction of the oil from the dirt sands and other stuff is a significant issue in the oil sand industry, and thus accurate characterization of the tailings is required. Going further, because of this assumption and also government regulation, one unconventional test in particular, that's why I ended up making this, the seepage-induced consolidation test, SICT, SICT, has been shown to accurately determine compressibility and permeability relations for low-density slurries. The SICT was first constructed at the Colorado University CU in Boulder, Colorado, and has been used for the past 2 decades to characterize phosphate slurry tailings. Over the last 2 years, a SICT was constructed at the University of British Columbia to provide accurate consolidation and characterization of oil sand waste, in particular mature fine tailings, which is again just oil sand superfine waste. So if you go on further to page 10 of my thesis paper, Directive 074, in 2009, the Energy Resource Conservation Board, ERCB, is I believe it's a government panel in Alberta, Canada, implemented Directive 074, which set out guidelines for tailings management and reclamation timelines that all oil sand operators must abide by, and then the ERCB regulates oil sand mining, processing, and waste, including tailings operations, and operators must get ERCB approval to commence. So they need these pretty strict approval guidelines by government to commence their oil operation. So it's to commence, suspend, or abandon an oil sand site, as well as approval for waste generation. Key objectives in Directive 074 involve minimizing long-term storage of fluid tailings, minimizing freshwater use, and to create a trafficable landscape from the tailings to facilitate reclamation. Specific criteria that operators must follow include: fluid tailings must have a minimum of 5 kPa undrained shear strength after 1 year of disposal, ready for reclamation within 5 years after active deposition has ceased, in which the surface is trackable, and must have a minimum undrained shear strength of 10 kPa. So going on further, these stringent criteria require that oil sand operators must invest more into MFT dewatering technologies, which is what I was developing, as well as the need for proper characterization in terms of consolidation and permeability, which are required in predicting settlement and shear strength increase with time. So going further, so now my analysis of this is basically, while I do believe that oil sand waste is a significant issue, I disagree with the notion of anyone using that one sentence in my abstract indicating to state that I, quote, endorse this position. That's something I believe just because it seems reasonable to me, but again, I'm not an expert in how significant the oil sand waste issue is, and similar to climate change, I would rather read papers reviewing the arguments of actual experts on that specific topic instead of some random consensus on consensus papers. This is because even small assumptions have large consequences in the future, such as time, money, and even possibly societal conflict or societal conflicts, war, and whatnot for energy consumption and resources. So tying in to climate government policy, the governmental ERCB policy towards oil sand waste criteria is nothing. Is something that I have not, a lot of typos, have not reviewed in any great detail, because the assumption that it was scientifically valid was necessary for me to receive both government and private funding to undergo my research. So this was an assumption that I made that had financial benefits to it. So just some assumption. I'm assuming that scientists at the top are not doing something nefarious, which is pretty much what this whole climate change thing is. It's people assume that no one's doing anything nefarious. That's all. So by relying on such assumptions for government funding, but relying on assumptions for government funding is one of the biggest critiques of the current academic environment that I have, and I hope that the climate changes soon. Just fix that, and I hope this climate changes soon, because basically these huge assumptions is required to get funding, especially from the government, and that is again my critique on it. So instead of for me trying to on my own try to figure out if that directive is correct or misleading or in any way, and not get funding for that research, I could just be like, okay, I'll assume it's right, I'll get some money, and I'll go do some work on MFT, dewatering, or the oil sand waste dewatering. So now let's look at mainstream media coverage. I want a quick, this is a DuckDuckGo search. I've been using that now instead of Google, just to see the difference. Now, if you look at DuckDuckGo, climate change consensus 97%. So you have climate, NASA is the one, vital signs of the planet scientific consensus. I believe that's the one that I went through. Then this National Review says no, it's not a 97%. I believe this is a conservative news outlet, so that's interesting. So then you have the Guardian, big news outlet, again much bigger than National Review. Climate consensus at 97%. Environment, Forbes fact checking it. This one is like actually it was a neutral one. It's pretty interesting. Then Bloomberg 97% on climate change. It's complicated. Skeptical Science 97%. Well, it appears to be some doubt about the 97% figure, but again that's DuckDuckGo right there. But if you do it on Google, which pretty much everyone uses, let's look at climate change consensus 97%. Then there's the Forbes fact checking the claim of 97% consensus on anthropogenic anthropogenic global warming. This is a somewhat neutral one, but again they understand that it is a bit more complicated than that, because it looks at abstracts and other stuff like that, and so yes, that's interesting overall. But now if you go to climate, this has the NASA one, and now you have Skeptical Science up there, and as the 97% consensus. Bloomberg has it. It says it's complicated, but again, overall, it's still somewhat. This is just because of that abstract paper that I went over. And then the Guardian survey finds 97% it's man-made. The Guardian again, Scientific American. It's interesting here. The scientists examined 4,000 abstracts on climate change and found 97%. There's the Obama tweeted it. And here above here, so there's another Guardian one. Again, Guardian is much bigger than Natural Review or the other ones. 97% is the climate consensus. 97, 99.9, or is plate tectonics a hoax? Clearly turned discouraging. This is a later article. So here I write, wow, Google's front page is very different from DuckDuckGo's and heavily favors the 97% consensus figure, because from here the only ones that are questioning it is this one here is like somewhat neutral, and then the Bloomberg one is complicated, it's fact checking, but if you go through that article, it's still on the climate change. It's not worth assuming that it's not consensus on it. So regardless, that's somewhat censorship, and just get on DuckDuckGo. Yes, I was actually surprised DuckDuckGo has National Review showing up there. That alone is pretty interesting. You'll have different opinions, different sides of the argument showing up. But now if you go to this article by David Suzuki, nationalpost.com, jail politician who ignored climate science. And again, these overpaid scientist actors here. He says prominent scientist David Suzuki says that people should look for a way to hold politicians who ignore climate change science legally responsible. As from 2008. Now you have Bill Nye here on Washington Times. Bill Nye science guy is open to criminal charges and jail time for climate change dissenters. So when you have articles and hit pieces like this on the mainstream news, you know it's going to be hard to try to reject AGW. So Bill Nye will perform at U.S. Going on. So anyways, nothing like overpaid scientists, actors pushing for jailing dissenters. Hashtag Bill Nye, the fake science guy. But now let's look at the big picture, whether even if AGW is real or not. I'll show you the big picture. So we are at a social climate where climate change is pushed at all levels of our life, in the media and school and politics, and even through selective school funding, i.e. try obtaining grant money from the government if you are researching into how the climate is not changing, or that if it is changing, it's not due to humans, or that increasing taxes, cutting energy production won't reverse climate change, and thus government doesn't need to collect billions in taxes or trillions from people. Hashtag good luck getting funny. So thus it should not be surprising that people writing papers about climate change would have statements indicating some, quote, endorsement of climate change and climate change of being human cause. But my view is the entire concept of endorse or reject, minimize AGW is a flawed concept because it gives the perception that climate scientists have a uniform view as to the level of AGW and the level of impeding consequences based on the level of mitigation. Although many in the science community, quote, endorse AGW, I believe that these same people would have varying opinions on questions such as, at the current rate of CO2 emissions, how many years will it take for catastrophic conditions to take place? Or what do you consider catastrophic conditions? Is it cheaper to mitigate GW now with current technology or wait until technology has improved? What are the negative human impacts of implementing climate change policies across the board, i.e. fossil fuel generated electricity may greatly reduce human suffering and death in the poorest countries? Should we just cut that out, or what should we do? Do the perceived consequences outweigh the negative impacts? Is it even possible to mitigate AGW with the current technology? How would you rate your expertise in AGW? Or is it just about the taxes? We'll keep our identity anonymous. So yeah, those, you're not going to hear that from scientists. And now the very big picture: hidden tech, false flag, and wars. If you believe in global warming, you must be anti-war at any and all stops. So as mentioning in my ongoing hashtag 9/11 Truths video series, you can watch playlist here, mes.fm/9/11truths-playlist. The World Trade Center complex, 7 buildings, not just 2, were mostly turned to dust with top secret, classified, directed to hashtag free energy technology. So buy Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where the Towers Go. Here's a affiliate link, mes.fm/JudyWood book. You can also visit drjudywood.com for more info. So again, this is my position on it. I'll be going over this in great detail in my videos here, so 9/11 Truth wants to make sure to watch that. So here's some tweets I made. So what happened 9/11 is irrefutable. The towers turn to dust. Hashtag 9/11 Truth. Hashtag free energy. Hashtag protest government. Hashtag Dr. Judy Wood. So here's some images I shared. And as you see, this is, I don't know what this is, like a giant alpha seltzer tablet where you drop it in water and just completely does some weird stuff like that. And then, so if you look at it for the scale, here's the 2 twin towers. There's just yellow, just to show you the scale of what's left over shortly after. Absolutely nothing. Look how tall, that's how big it is. That's that little building, and this is 110 stories, 2 of them, and remember there's 7 buildings total around that complex. And where is the building? Why is nothing on this? Why is nothing falling on this? The towers never fell. They turned to dust in midair with top secret tech. Another one, where do the towers go? Asking for a friend. Hashtag turned to dust. Hashtag wake up people. So basically boycott government, in my opinion. So I don't know how can you explain this by anything. How it's not explosions, it's not quote airplanes. Even if an airplane hit it, what is happening to this? What is this? And now, as you can see, nothing there, no damage to that. And there was an ambulance close to the towers. Looks like the windows aren't even broken, or at least these ones aren't. Not crushed by, let's see that. Let's see this giant. Imagine you had a car here or anywhere near, and then your windows aren't even broken. Unbelievable. Crazy. So I'll be covering all of this in great detail. So make sure to follow my 9/11 Truth video series, as well as supporting me on Patreon, because I'm undergoing the research to develop #free energy in both mathematical theory and in an open source practical device that can be replicated by anyone. Because in my view, I believe we live in a technological dictatorship as of now, where hidden tech is the name of the control game. So it is my view that this is not a theory. This is what I just showed you there. It's not a theory about 9/11, but an established fact, and thus raises the question as to why this technology is hidden from us, as well as to what other tech is hidden from us. Again, that's my view on that. I'll go explain it in great detail in the video series to follow, but also make sure to buy her book, Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where the Towers Go. So again, it is an established fact in my view, not a theory. That it was using top secret technology that can do that. The resulting consensus assumption, again, there's a consensus word, that Muslim terrorists with box cutter knives hijacked 4 large planes and flew them in the air for about an hour or so undetected or unshot down by CIA drones or whatnot. At unheard of high speeds at low altitude for those kind of planes into 3 buildings, the Pentagon and its Twin Towers, has led to, again, that just assuming that it's just Muslim terrorists, TV told us, has led to unending wars in the Middle East that has caused untold death and suffering, as well as an untold amount of pollution, overconsumption through taxation to pay for those wars, and burning of fossil fuels. A war. You don't like fossil fuels? Stop going to war. Thus, it is my view that the entire climate change debate is a phony bone of contention, since whether it is true or not, the real, quote, bone of contention should be about fabricated terror that leads to war, and hidden technology that can already get us off of fossil fuels, and whether classified weather manipulation tech are available or / currently being used. Because once you realize one thing's conspiracy or one tech is hidden, like that free energy that turned the towers into dust, other questions start snowballing, like what else can be done? What other kind of propulsion devices are there? So if you are new to the 9/11 conspiracy fact, not a theory, fact, just consider the already mainstream acceptance that intelligence agencies got it wrong about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. They seriously think we are stupid sheep. Yeah, because in my view, they did not get it wrong. They knew exactly what they're doing. This is the CIA getting trillions in taxpayer funding. If I was getting trillions, I guarantee you I will not make a mistake about whether a country has weapons of mass destruction or not. And then here's what happens to war criminals that lead to war and death and suffering. So media's job: lie, push for war, lie about war, and cover up for war criminals, and then repeat. So here's George Bush. And this is Business Insider, again, mainstream news outlet. 39 photos that show why everyone misses George Bush. This is actually recently, a couple days ago. Unbelievable. This guy should be in jail. And I have Ellen DeGeneres, again, posting a selfie with him. Whenever I see George Bush walk on a talk, I get confused as why he's not spending a life sentence in prison. And here's a photo of Iraq. So the U.S. government spent over $2 trillion US on the Iraq war. This is extra money in taxes and future spending that is, again, overconsumption, because we don't have that money. There's enough taxes. It's very hard to pay for this stuff. And think about all this death here. How much pollution is being spent on all the bombs and vehicles and all that, and this untold levels of suffering that are led from that assumption that they have weapons of mass destruction, that terrorists did 9/11, and now you have this one again. Roughly 180,000 civilians have been killed following the 2003 invasion of Iraq. War criminals are given public relations pieces in mainstream media outlets. That climate change skeptics are ridiculed. So you can go to war on false pretense, get a bunch of people killed, get a bunch of money printed, and get a bunch of pollution to occur, and basically destroy the land using depleted uranium shells and just untold levels of just carbon burning and burning fossil fuels and contributing to climate change. So yeah, this is the world we live in. But if you a skeptic of climate change, you have Bill Nye saying he wants you in jail. And also note that the death toll above is violent deaths and don't include indirect deaths from disease, malnutrition, lack of medical treatment, etc. You can learn more at here. I posted several articles a year or two ago on percentage calculator website there and inflation calculator. You can check that out. This is for the money. This is about just the random facts I put up there. Now you may ask, how is climate change and war related? Well, as I explained, yeah, you use a lot of pollution there. But the Iraq, quote, war, because I just don't even know, war is between two different sides. I believe we live in some sort of technological dictatorship where war is manipulated so that the only people suffering are people on both sides. People on top are possibly colluding. I'll get to that maybe later. So the Iraq, quote, war and climate change are interconnected in that proving the war was orchestrated means we have much bigger concerns to think about than even if climate change is as real as it gets. Even if climate change is super real, we're about to let's say there's going to be a bunch of changes, floods and whatever around the world. If the powers that be orchestrated the war, I think we have some bigger issues to deal with, because these are some powerful people and a lot of people are dying regardless. So that's why I'm saying this is interconnected. You cannot just glance over it and say, oh, it was a mistake, or terrorists did 9/11 without looking at the evidence, because assumptions lead to people dying. And also I want to point out the obsession with, quote, consensus is very dangerous because people are easily manipulated. Yeah, so my view is that the entire consensus obsession is a ploy to exploit human psychology and its ready willingness to lie to itself to conform with a group consensus or a perceived group consensus. 97% of scientists say it. Better believe it. Here's a video I shared before, and you could watch it. I'm not going to show it right here. And also, last time I showed it, I got a disclaimer. I know I got a copyright claims, and the video is demonetized. But anyways, watch as a short 5-minute skit or a clip, and then basically shows that these experiments are known as the Asch conformity experiments, to show that even for something as simple as the length of a line, so you had a group of people here, and there's length of a line, you have to say which one matches up with it. Obviously, number 2 there. But if you had a bunch of people saying that it was actually 3, and then this person's going to be like, oh man, everyone's saying 3, they must be right. I'll pick 3 as well. If everyone's saying climate change, it must be right. So for something as simple as the length of a line, individuals tend to conform to the group consensus, even when the group's views are in opposition to the individuals. But then also interesting, splintering the consensus by even just a few people greatly lowers the effectiveness of the whole group. Yeah, which is why they're pushing so hard against anyone dissenting, is even just a few, and all of a sudden you have more people willing to dissent. So anonymity greatly reduces group influence, which is very interesting. Yeah, if nobody knows what you're if no one can see you saying something and you just put it anonymously, you're likely going to put your actual true feelings without feeling the backlash of the group. So that video is a must watch. So you just watch it, pause the video, watch it, and come back, and shows that it is not too difficult to manipulate groups into any particular direction, such as towards justifying trillions in military spending on an endless fabricated war on terror. So again, my view is that fabricated terror overrides even climate change, whether it's real or not. There's unanswered questions about 9/11. Well, in my view, it is pretty much answered with the Dr. Judy Woods work. So in part 2, I'm going to go over the analysis of the abstract data. In this part 1 video, I went over my overall perception of the paper by Cook et.al., and I made arguments against the dangers of obsessing over consensus. In part 2, I will look very closely at the data used by Cook et.al. to uncover some figures that actually present a better picture of the scientific view on AGW, so stay tuned for that video. And I'll just go over the papers and abstracts that they considered endorsed, not endorsed. It's gonna be pretty interesting, and I'll make some own graphs and figures. I had an Excel sheet made before. I'll go over that, update it, and do some other cool stuff. So stay tuned for that video. Anyways, that is all for today. Hopefully follow along this pretty extensive video on climate change and my view on it, just based on this Cook et al. Paper, which is, I believe, the most popular one or most widely spread out. It's one Obama's tweeting to his 65% real followers. And yeah, so interesting stuff. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed. Like always, you can download these exact notes in the link below, as well as viewing these whole notes on Steemit in article format, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for another Math Easy solution.